After Virgil told Kevin that he invited him over to apologize on behalf of Thornton's previous actions, Kevin had begun to think that he was an honorable man after all. However, after briefly asking about Thornton's attitude while accompanying Kevin on his trip, Virgil suddenly remarked about his unexpected connection to the Radiants, revealing the real reason why he'd asked to come see him in person. Using the Huxley family's connections, Virgil had thoroughly investigated everything that happened in Detroit, including the incident of Kevin bringing Thornton along with him to the Hayes family when he caused a huge ruckus at the wedding. While the others only knew that the Radiance was responsible for eliminating the Hayes family, Virgil believed that the 5 Hill siblings who led the bloody attack had been brought there by Kevin. After all, it was too much of a coincidence, wasn't it? Adding the fact that Thornton had told him everything that had happened upon his return, Virgil was even more certain that Kevin had a deep connection with the Radiance, which was currently all over the news for its fierce reputation. Moreover, it was very likely that he not only held a high position in the Radiance, but also had a great relationship with the Chancellor. As the Huxley family's patriarch, Virgil had to constantly judge every situation and make decisions for his family. In Thornton's case, the situation was very clear. His son was quite arrogant and somewhat hedonistic, and if he never experienced what it was like to keep a low profile, how could he deserve to inherit the Huxley family's business in the future? Therefore, one of the reasons why he made Thornton honor his bet with Kevin was because Virgil wanted to keep him humble for once. However, the main reason why he did this was because of Kevin's talent in herbalism. At that very moment, Kevin glanced at Virgil. He now knew that this was the real purpose for his visit today. "Mr. Huxley, you might have figured out that I do have some kind of connection with the Radiants, but it's still a little far from what you probably have in mind," Kevin teased with a faint smile. "Mr. Williams, you don't have to be so polite and formal. After all, you and Thornton are friends. You can just call me Uncle Virgil instead." Virgil didn't continue to care about this topic. "Furthermore, I'm a good friend of your father, Richard Swinton, so it's all right to treat me like an uncle. On that note, I'll also start calling you Kevin." "I guess it would be impolite of me to refuse, Uncle Virgil." Kevin slightly nodded his head in agreement. Although the words of the two men sounded casual, the rest of the people in the Huxley family were shocked when they heard them. How many people had wanted to establish a relationship with the Huxley family over the years? Moreover, how many people outside the family could be considered to be worthy enough to address Virgil as an uncle? What was so special about this young man? Based on his clothes, he looked like a person who had walked straight out of a small farming town. Although he could be considered a talented individual, wasn't his background too poor to be in the same room as them? "If you think it might be possible, I'd like to invite the leaders of the Radiants to visit the Huxley family mansion as guests. I'm a very hospitable person," Virgil said with a loud laugh. "Don't worry, Uncle Virgil. I'm sure we can set a date for that soon." Kevin revealed an unfathomable smile. Deep down, he'd been worried that he wouldn't have the chance to gain the Huxley family support. But in the end, it seemed that Virgil himself had wanted to align himself with the Radiants all along. "Great. I'll start preparing then." Virgil was in a good mood. At that time, the Radiance was getting more and more famous not just among the different organizations, but across the world. In particular, everyone was intrigued by the Chancellor's unmatched strength and herbalism skills. And if Virgil was able to establish a good relationship with an organization that was led by such a powerful expert, the Huxley family would present a very tough challenge for anyone who dared to go against them in the future. Kevin and Virgil had spent the entire morning talking and laughing casually, but in reality, they were just doing this because they needed something from each other. However, Thornton was extremely depressed when he saw the situation. He thought that his father had called Kevin over to teach him a lesson after learning about all the suffering that he had to endure over the past few days. But now the two of them were getting along so well that it seemed like Kevin was the son that his father had always wanted. He had never expected that this would be the outcome. Meanwhile, in the study of the Swinton family mansion, Richard Swinton and Catherine were discussing something. Both of their faces looked extremely bothered. "Another 30 men were injured while they were out on Blade Mountain. Whoever's behind this is really brave. How dare they attack our people?" Richard's tone was filled with anger. "Even if we use all of our strength to fight back." Catherine didn't finish her words, but the tone of her voice wasn't optimistic. "But Blade Mountain is one of the major entry and exit points of our family business." Richard was fuming so much that his body emitted a ruthless aura. "If this continues, I'll have no choice but to personally take my men there to deal with those troublemakers." "Richard, it's too dangerous. You can't go there. I heard that an evil force took over Blade Mountain and they have more than 4,000 members gathered there. Moreover, their 7 leading men are all at least level 5 experts. No matter how strong you are, you'll be vastly outnumbered." Catherine immediately rejected her husband's suggestion. Richard could only sigh lightly when he heard her. However, his anger didn't waver in the slightest. The path along Blade Mountain was the main road that the Swinton family and others in St. Louis used to transport medicinal herbs. If they were forced to relinquish this route, their men would have to take a detour of nearly 2 miles. After thinking about it some more, Catherine suddenly had an idea. What if we asked the 10 grade schools for help? Richard was stunned by this suggestion and he immediately shook his head. "Don't even think about it. I recently heard that the great powers have entered an emergency state of preparation. Apart from the Union, which remains in seclusion, the leaders from the other 9 schools are currently standing their ground in Chicago with their men. That city will be where the ultimate showdown begins. Compared to the overall situation, the major schools won't care about what happens in St. Louis." Richard helplessly let out a long sigh. Compared to the safety of the world, their personal benefits were too insignificant. "How about the Radiants? Their reputation has been rising lately. Aren't they claiming to be upholders of righteous justice?" Catherine asked, unwilling to give up her idea. Richard thought long and hard about the possibility. "Well, there are more than 10,000 members in the Radiants now, and their chancellor's energy base is said to be unmatched. He even defeated one of the 10 schools' leaders with his terrifying strength. But the problem is, how can we get the Radiants to help us? Aren't they still busy in Detroit?" "You can invite a few families to join us in reaching out to the Radiants. After all, the road along Blade Mountain isn't only used for the Swinton family's business. You can discuss this with them during Grandpa Thompson's birthday tonight." Catherine's eyes revealed some hope. Richard nodded slightly and didn't say anything else. Back in Kevin's Corwin Tower apartment in Chicago, Lily leaned on the couch as she stared blankly at the ceiling. It had been several days since she'd received any news from Kevin. And when she woke up that day, she simply saw a text message saying that he still had something to deal with. The other person who worried Lily the most was Dorothy. She had returned to her place at the Salix Leaf 4 times already, but still hadn't seen her. She even called her mother's friends to ask, but they didn't know where she was either. Right now, the 2 most important people in her life were gone. And this made Lily feel so alone. Although the apartment was luxurious, the place was cold and empty, without anyone else to share it with. Just then, the doorbell suddenly rang. Lily thought that Kevin had returned and she became excited. However, when she opened the door, she didn't see Kevin, but Phoebe Anderson. Didn't she already get married in Detroit? Phoebe greeted her with a smile. "Hello, Lily. Kevin said that he's had a lot on his plate recently. He was afraid that you would be bored alone, so he asked me to stay with you for a while." "Thank you. Please, come inside." Lily smiled back at her. The bright moon and stars were glittering brightly above the Thompson family mansion in St. Louis. Several guests had gathered together that night, and everyone knew that they were there to attend Herman Thompson's birthday party. Not many people could say they'd reached his old age, so this was certainly a feat to celebrate. And as long as he was still alive, the Thompson family would continue to stand strong as one of the top 4 families in the Midwest. As each guest was about to enter, the reception staff at the door would shout their name. They would then hand over gifts, which were now piled up into a mountain. Suddenly, the reception staff announced loudly, "Virgil Huxley, the patriarch of the Huxley family of St. Louis, has arrived. Accompanying him is his son, Thornton Huxley." Shortly after, another familiar name was announced. "The Swinton family of St. Louis has arrived." Who else would be attending Herman Thompson's party that evening? The guests began to arrive at Herman Thompson's birthday party. The reception staff announced everyone's arrival, just like at a royal function at a palace. When the Huxleys and the Swintons were announced, the noisy courtyard immediately quieted down. Everyone knew that there were a few big families in the St. Louis region. The Huxley and Swinton families were so filthy rich that no regular person could imagine their lavish lifestyle. A group of young men walked into the courtyard. Wherever their eyes went, they couldn't help but lower their heads, not daring to look at each other. "I didn't expect you all to be here so early. We've already prepared places for all of you." As the young master of the Thompson family, Kyle greeted them warmly. In the absence of Grandpa Thompson and Joseph Thompson, he was the only one who was in a position to converse with the Swinton family and the Huxley family. "That's very kind of you, Kyle. Today is your grandfather's birthday and we're here to celebrate with you, so I hope that everyone won't be too nervous. Tonight we only care about eating and drinking and we won't talk about any business matters." Virgil Huxley laughed as he spoke to all of them. "Uncle Virgil, you're being too serious. You and Mr. Swinton are my elders. It's only natural for me to be the one to welcome you here," Kyle said to them very respectfully. From this, it could be seen that there was a huge difference between him and common posers who dressed fashionably but didn't know how to behave. Only after the two families took their seats did the other guests who were there dare to relax and heave a sigh of relief. "What a powerful aura! It's so oppressive that I almost can't breathe," one of them commented. "What the hell are you talking about? That's the Swinton family and the Huxley family," his friend replied sarcastically. "The leaders of both families have personally brought their men here to celebrate Grandpa Thompson's birthday. It seems like the 3 families have a very good relationship with each other," added one of the other guests. While these people were discussing the celebration in a low voice, anybody with sharp enough eyes could see that something wasn't right. There was actually an unfamiliar man sitting next to Brenda. While the two of them were talking and laughing, Thornton was also sitting there next to the mysterious man. "My God, who is that person? Seems like he has a good relationship with Brenda," someone whispered. But the man didn't look like anyone they were familiar with from St. Louis's high society. "Who could dare to think that he could have a relationship with someone like Brenda Swinton? What the heck is the background of this kid?" one of the guests said to his companion. Kevin and Brenda's performance had caused a huge commotion amongst the people in the crowd. After all, everyone knew that Thornton Huxley had been longing for Brenda for years. There wasn't anybody in all of St. Louis who wasn't aware of this. But Kevin had no idea there was anything wrong, so he continued to chat and joke around with Brenda. "You and Gail really misunderstood what was going on this morning." Although Kevin had a smile on his face, his tone of voice was very serious. "Don't try to cover it up. I understand. You know what people say, love is love. I won't judge you one way or the other. I've heard about these things before, you know." Brenda slightly lowered her head and replied to him in a low voice. "Don't you understand? It's really not what you think. If you don't believe me, just ask Thornton about it." Kevin was starting to panic. Just then, Thornton suddenly decided to join in the conversation. "Don't ask me. Anyway, I was forced, but don't worry, Brenda. You're the only one in my heart." Gail looked at Kevin with disgust. Although she didn't say anything, her face was full of disdain. She moved her lips but didn't say anything out loud. However, it wasn't really hard to see that she didn't approve of Kevin at all. This made Kevin raise an eyebrow as he watched Gail's reaction and wondered what her problem was. Virgil Huxley, who witnessed all of this, took a long, hard look at Brenda and then looked over at Kevin. From the information he'd gathered, Kevin had been thrown out of the Williams family of New York City. And a few years ago, even his parents had been chased out of the family. Then, Kevin became the son-in-law of a small family in Chicago. However, Virgil Huxley had some doubts about these things. After all, the talent that Kevin had displayed was too impressive for someone with such a checkered past. Something obviously didn't add up. With his ability, no matter where Kevin went, he would definitely be sought after by very powerful forces. Whether it was in terms of herbalism or physical and mental development, these people were the best of the younger generation. Although Virgil Huxley thought that Thornton was a lion among men, next to Kevin, he was like a tiny little firefly compared to the sun or the moon. Even though he was reluctant to admit it, the truth was right in front of him, and he had to believe it. So Virgil would rather believe the information revealed by his investigation. It seemed that Kevin had deliberately lied to the world. There must be a lot of unknown secrets the young man was keeping hidden. I wonder, how did Richard Swinton and Mr. Williams get to know each other? And from what I've heard, he even took him in as his foster son, Virgil Huxley suddenly asked. All of a sudden, Virgil's questions attracted the attention of everyone who was sitting with him at the table. This is a Swinton family matter, Virgil. It's really nothing you should concern yourself with right now, okay? Richard Swinton took a sip of his wine and glanced over at him. Richard believed that Virgil Huxley must have investigated Kevin's background, which was why he asked this question. However, he wanted to vent his anger at Virgil Huxley for bringing these things up in public. The look in Richard's eyes clearly said, "Do you think I have such a good son? Are you jealous? Just look at the kind of son you've raised." Sure enough, Virgil Huxley got a nervous look on his face. "Richard, I see you as a brother, and Mr. Williams is a man with great talent. And I'm a member of the Swinton family," Richard aggressively interrupted him. The atmosphere at the table turned extremely tense, and even Kevin became very serious. "Richard Swinton, did you take your medicine today? I'm only asking you a few simple questions." Virgil Huxley wasn't afraid of the Swinton family like the other people were. He had the confidence to challenge the man. When he heard his father talking like this, Thornton felt like dying. "Dad, can you please control your temper? I still want to have a chance to marry Brenda. Please don't offend my future father-in-law and blow my chances with her." However, Richard Swinton appeared very calm. He gently placed his wine glass on the table and looked Virgil straight in the eyes. "Did I ask you to ask me any questions? What if I like Kevin? Do I need to report to you about my adopted son's background?" Richard's response made Virgil Huxley feel very uneasy. What Richard had just said wasn't wrong at all, and the people who were listening to their conversation thought that it made a lot of sense. The most important thing that he was calling him out for sticking his nose in other people's business. Richard was so angry that his breathing was starting to get rapid. Kevin and the rest of the younger people in the room held back the urge to laugh. It was painful to bite their tongues and keep their laughter inside. However, the way Virgil looked at Richard Swinton was obviously not as amusing. This was a well-educated and experienced martial artist. Usually he responded with more than just words. Just as Virgil Huxley's temper was about to flare up, everybody heard the sound of footsteps approaching them. A loud voice got everyone's attention, and they all turned and looked in the same direction. "Let's welcome the man of the hour." They all saw Herman Thompson, whose face was absolutely radiant, walking casually into the room. What shocked them was that he was doing it without any assistance at all. This caused some people to become very suspicious. Hadn't Grandpa Thompson recently gotten so ill that he was on the verge of death? In fact, almost half of the guests who had come that night were there to find out more about the situation. If Grandpa Thompson really couldn't make it to the party, they would have made other plans for the evening. "Grandpa Thompson!" everybody shouted. Following the lead of the Swinton family and the Huxley family, everyone stood up and cheered for Herman Thompson. Now the party could really begin. When Grandpa Thompson finally arrived at his party, the mood changed and everyone was ready to help him celebrate.
Thank you for your support. Tonight,
Herman Thompson had just finished his sentence when he got a strange expression on his face. It started out as a look of surprise and then it turned into shock. Joseph Thompson and Kyle followed his gaze and looked at him. They were both immediately stunned, not knowing what was going on. When the Huxley family and the Swinton family arrived, Kevin and Brenda were sitting toward the back of the room. Plus, Kyle didn't ask about the other two families because of his status, so they didn't notice him. But now, the three of them recognized Kevin, especially Grandpa Thompson, who was trembling with excitement. The guests also noticed the reaction of the three men from the Thompson family, and their eyes gradually focused on Kevin. The guests all started to whisper to each other, "What the hell is going on? Could this man be an enemy of the Thompson family?"
"I remember he came with the Swinton family, and he was sitting next to Brenda Swinton, talking and laughing," one of them remarked.
"If he only offended Kyle Thompson, he might still have a chance to live, but if he offended the entire Thompson family," another guest wondered out loud.
"Seems like tonight's birthday party is going to be interesting,"
the guest's friend pointed out. Richard Swinton and his wife Catherine frowned slightly. They didn't know why the three men from the Thompson family had suddenly reacted like this. Could it be that Kevin has somehow offended the members of the Thompson family? This thought had just flashed across their minds, but they brushed it off immediately. Kevin had lived in the Chicago area for a long time, but much earlier in his life, he'd lived in New York City. Although the Williams family was considered to be wealthy, they'd never had the chance to rub elbows with people like the Thompson family. Virgil Huxley looked at Kevin, either intentionally or unintentionally, and then shifted his gaze to Richard Swinton. In the corner of his mouth, you could see a disdainful smirk beginning to form.
"Isn't it great that you've adopted a son? As long as Grandpa Thompson doesn't like him, no matter how outstanding he is, it will be a waste of time," Virgil growled.
Gail looked at Kevin with disgust. "When did this country bumpkin do it? If he offended Grandpa Thompson, it would be hard to explain to his father." Without giving them any time to think, the three of them slowly walked over to Kevin, following Herman Thompson's lead, and greeted him very politely.
"Mr. Williams, I really didn't expect you to be here tonight,"
Herman Thompson said in surprise. Joseph Thompson and his son Kyle also looked happy too. Kevin was the one who had concocted the pill to save Grandpa Thompson, and he'd also pointed out the problems with the Thompson family's gravesite. Up until that time, the Thompson family had clearly felt that something just wasn't right. But Kevin had fixed all their problems, and everyone in the family had been in high spirits ever since. Even their minds felt much clearer than before. Kyle clearly understood the gap between him and Kevin, and his respect for him grew more and more each day. "Have you been in good health lately, Grandpa Thompson? Seems like you've recovered quite well," Kevin replied with a sincere smile.
"Thank you for your concern, Mr. Williams. After taking your pill, my entire body has become much stronger,"
Herman Thompson said respectfully. Then he turned to Thornton and said,
"Move aside and find a different seat so I can get closer to Mr. Williams."
All right,
Thornton stood up, dumbstruck. He walked over to an empty chair, but he didn't sit down for a long time. Seeing such an awkward situation, everyone in the room was deeply shocked. They couldn't wrap their heads around it. Some of them had their mouths hanging open so far you could stuff a billiard ball in it. Their reactions ranged from, "What's going on?" to, "What the hell is going on? Who can explain the reason for this to me?" They were wondering what kind of man Herman Thompson really was. He was generally seen as a pillar of the community and a highly ranked member of society. When he sneezed, the entire Midwest said "bless you" and gave him a handkerchief. But who the heck was Kevin? Nobody in the room had even heard of him.
"What's going on with Grandpa Thompson?"
Virgil Huxley finally got over his shock and asked Richard.
"Do you know Kevin?"
Richard Swinton's face was filled with shock as he asked him.
"Not only do we know Mr. Williams, but he's also a great benefactor of my family, every single one of us."
Herman Thompson would never treat the others with the same respect that he showed to Kevin. These words made the people around them even more confused. The ones who didn't know Kevin were muttering, trying to figure out who he was. They wondered, could it be that this kid is from that big family in Chicago? But the way he's dressed, that can't possibly be the case. Kevin smiled. He'd told the Thompson family not to tell anyone about him concocting pills and saving people. But it seemed like Joseph Thompson had done a good job. After all, the Thompson family was a supreme power. In fact, they held too much power in their hands, and it was incredibly easy for them to deliberately leak some information. Thornton Huxley furrowed his brows and reflected deeply for a while. When he thought about what Herman Thompson had just said, his eyes suddenly widened in shock. Richard Swinton and Catherine, who had also thought of this, looked at Kevin in a different way.
Could it be that Mr. Williams is the one who made the pills for you?
Virgil Huxley asked in shock.
Do you know anything about that?
Herman Thompson asked. You could tell that he knew more than he was letting on. Hearing this, Virgil Huxley's face suddenly changed.
I don't dare say anything more, Herman. I just heard some rumors, that's all. All right. There's no need to hide it anymore, but if you can't even do this, your family isn't really one of the 3 most important in the Midwest.
Herman Thompson waved his hand indifferently and didn't continue to dwell on the subject. Richard Swinton's expression kept changing while he thought about the different possibilities. Although Grandpa Thompson had only said a few simple words, the amount of information contained in those words seemed to say plenty. Of course, there were very few people who could truly understand the meaning of what he'd said.
Mr. Williams has paid a special visit to us today. I'd like to make a request to you by offering a toast.
Herman Thompson personally poured a glass of wine for Kevin. The people who saw this were absolutely floored by it. What did they just see? When has Grandpa Thompson ever poured a glass of wine for somebody? They immediately began speculating on Kevin's background. One of them commented, "Why do I feel like this is all a dream? Don't tell me I'm still awake." And another guest turned to his wife and said, "Honey, please pinch me so I can see if I'm dreaming." However, Kevin acted as if he didn't hear anything that they were saying. He looked at Herman Thompson indifferently and said, "You're being too serious, Grandpa Thompson. If you need me to do anything, just say so." Herman Thompson heaved a sigh of relief. He motioned to Kyle, who was standing next to him. Then Kyle walked over to Kevin and took a knee. While everyone watched skeptically, the usually very dignified Kyle actually said, "Please forgive me for being so uncivilized. I can't begin to express how I feel right now. I was an absolute jerk." The other guests couldn't believe what they were seeing. How could Kevin be getting so much attention when it was supposed to be Grandpa Thompson's party? "What do you mean by this, Grandpa Thompson?" Kevin looked down at Kyle, who was kneeling on the ground in front of him, and he noticed that the young man had no problem with this and didn't seem at all unwilling.
"I want Kyle to become one of your students, Mr. Williams, or at least to be able to follow you. He needs to train for a few years."
Herman Thompson turned to look at his grandson.
"Kyle was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and doesn't know what hard work is. His whole life he's been praised and flattered by others, so he really doesn't know how difficult and dangerous the real world is."
Herman Thompson paused for a moment and then said,
"At the same time, I also believe that you have some talent. If he's fortunate enough to receive your guidance, he'll be able to broaden his horizons and advance to a higher level. Only then will he be able to take over the Thompson family safely in the future."
As Grandpa Thompson's voice trailed off, the entire room fell silent. Some people were stunned by the events that had happened one after another that evening, and some of them were still trying to catch their breath. Kevin gently sighed and shook his head. "I'm only 1 or 2 years older than Kyle. How could I possibly be his mentor?" "But Mr. Williams, I sincerely hope you can agree to be my mentor." After saying that, Kyle respectfully nodded his head and looked down at the floor. "Grandpa Thompson, this..." Kevin began to speak, but he was caught in a dilemma.
"Mr. Williams, you don't have to do this, but I see that you have an uncommon talent. I hope that you can help to guide Kyle and serve as an example to him.
Herman Thompson replied very sincerely. Joseph Thompson had been standing respectfully to the side. He looked at Kevin with a face full of hope, but he didn't say anything. After thinking for a while, Kevin lowered his eyes and looked at Kyle. He said seriously, "Grandpa Thompson should have seen through my plan. In the future, I might not be able to completely protect you, Kyle."
"You don't have to worry about that, Mr. Williams. Good leadership is more important. Kyle needs a chance to live up to his potential."
Herman Thompson replied frankly without holding anything back. "Well, since you've obviously made up your mind, I naturally can't turn down your request," Kevin said to Kyle very seriously. "Go ahead and stand up. Starting tonight, you're in training. I'll take you along with me when I leave St. Louis." "Thank you, sir. I'm happy to have someone like you as my mentor." Kyle wasn't a fool. He shook Kevin's hand very warmly as he got up from the floor and stood next to him. You could see the relief in Herman Thompson's eyes. He'd already seen that Kevin was definitely not an ordinary person. Currently, he was a hidden gem that hadn't been recognized by the world. When the time was right, he would be very useful to him. And when that time came, the Thompson family would naturally rise up, and they would once again return to their rightful place in the world. Joseph Thompson seized the opportunity to invite the guests to eat and drink. He also brought a few higher-ups of the Thompson family to drink a toast and liven up the atmosphere of the banquet. However, everyone there understood that Kevin's name would soon be spread across all of St. Louis, if not the entire Midwest. At Herman Thompson's birthday party, everyone started to recognize that Kevin was a force to be reckoned with, not just in Chicago, but in St. Louis as well. Grandpa Thompson was certain that aligning himself with Kevin would bring lots of good things to his family in the future.
"Thank you all for coming tonight. Cheers,"
Herman Thompson said warmly to Richard Swinton as he poured a glass of wine. He was in a very good mood.
"You're too polite, Grandpa Thompson. Don't forget that you're the reason we're here tonight. We should be the ones to offer a toast to you,"
Richard Swinton replied with a laugh. Kevin was his foster son. The fact that Grandpa Thompson thought so highly of him only proved that he was extremely outstanding. No other parent there could compare their child with Kevin. If anyone was in a bad mood at this table, it would naturally be the Huxleys and Gail Swinton. What Virgil Huxley valued was the relationship between the Swinton family and the Thompson family. Because of Kevin, their relationship would improve even more. If the two families joined forces now, it would be extremely difficult for the Huxley family to get a share of any business opportunities in St. Louis in the future. They might even find themselves sitting on the sidelines. This would have a serious impact on his plans. Thornton was depressed because the gap between him and Kevin was getting bigger and bigger all the time. Compared to a gem like Kevin, Brenda would never choose him in a million years. Especially when he saw Brenda looking at Kevin with such admiration, the anger in his heart got even worse. However, he couldn't act out yet, so all he could do was drink his glass of wine and wait for his chance. Gail gritted her teeth and glared at Kevin a few times. She still wanted to make use of tonight's banquet to make him look horrible in front of all the influential people in St. Louis. But she didn't expect Herman Thompson to suddenly make a move like that before her. It made her extremely confused, and for now, all she could do was try to hide her sadness.
"What are you still standing there for? What's the point of drinking alone? Hurry up and toast Mr. Williams."
Virgil Huxley suddenly slapped his son on the back of his head and admonished him.
"In the future, when you're by Mr. Williams' side, you'll need someone to take care of you."
Virgil Huxley immediately stood up and said very respectfully to Kevin,
"Mr. Williams, forgive me. My useless son will need you to take care of him for the next 3 years. Tonight I offer you a toast from us and the Thompson family."
Thornton held his head in pain and grumbled,
"Sorry to trouble you, Mr. Williams."
Kevin couldn't help but laugh at the behavior of the father and his son. A few people who were paying attention could see that Virgil Huxley was letting Grandpa Thompson know where he stood. At the same time, he was also warning the other guests that the three major families of St. Louis formed a united front. Nobody should dare to mess with them now. Catherine suddenly put down the wine glass in her hand and spoke very excitedly. "Kevin, are you very familiar with any members of the Radiants?" "Mom, don't joke around. Although Grandpa Thompson thinks highly of him, that doesn't mean anyone in the Radiants knows him. What do you think he is? Some kind of rock star?" Gail finally found a chance to put Kevin in his place.
"Gail, what are you talking about?"
Richard Swinton frowned as he reprimanded his daughter. The atmosphere at the table suddenly became less festive. Gail seemed to be praising the Radiants, or perhaps she was showing that she had a lower opinion of the Thompson family.
"Grandpa Thompson, don't pay any attention to our daughter. We spoil her too much."
Richard Swinton smiled apologetically and said,
"Let me make up for it with some more wine."
"No need to trouble yourself, Richard,"
Herman Thompson replied with a smile. However, Kevin didn't refuse to answer Catherine's question. "Is there a problem with my adopted mother asking a question like this?" Catherine didn't know what to say.
"Let me tell you."
Virgil Huxley took over the conversation and explained.
"Hundreds of miles from St. Louis, there are mountains everywhere. Of course, we know that the Rocky Mountains are known for their scenery, but some parts of the range offer great hiding places. The unofficial name that we use for the area is Blade Mountain."
Virgil continued to describe the situation.
"Those of us in St. Louis who are training at a very high level travel out to a special place in the Rockies. However, about 2 months ago, for some unknown reason, 7 powerful and evil men took over the area that we used and then brought a few thousand people to wreak havoc there. These evil men will take away our supplies and vehicles as they infiltrate the stronghold. However, most of the people in St. Louis are entrepreneurs, so there are very few people who have enough training in the martial arts and herbalism. As a result, we can't do anything to them."
Kevin instantly understood what he meant by this. "I'd like to let all of you know that, to tell you the truth, Kenneth Wilkinson and I are really good friends. If you want to ask the Radiants for help, I might be able to make a connection with them." Everyone turned to look at Kevin when he said this.
"Go ahead and brag, but be careful not to toot your own horn too much,"
Gail said in disbelief.
"What kind of person is Kenneth Wilkinson? Is he a master of herbalism and martial arts? Why would someone as powerful as him be friends with a nobody like you?"
When Gail said this, her eyes were filled with admiration, as if she had become a huge fan of Kenneth Wilkinson.
"Really, Mr. Williams? Do you really know Kenneth Wilkinson that well?"
Grandpa Thompson was so excited that his body started to shake. As one of the senior leaders in the Midwest, he'd served the people for many years. Before he fell ill, the Blade Mountain situation had caused him a lot of trouble. "Grandpa Thompson, please calm down. I do have a way to contact the people of the Radiants, but there are a few things I don't understand. Why didn't you invite the people from the top 10 schools? And why didn't you track down the members of the Radiants either?" Kevin asked in confusion.
"Nonsense. The people of the 10 major schools are only interested in their own status. Besides, there are more urgent matters to take care of. Where can they find the time to worry about little people like us?"
Catherine said grimly. Richard Swinton tugged slightly on his wife's sleeve, hinting that she probably shouldn't say too much more about it.
"Also, I heard that Kenneth Wilkinson has defeated Jeffrey Bowie. This is enough to prove that the Radiance isn't any weaker than any of the top 10 schools."
Virgil Huxley took another sip of wine, perhaps to give himself more courage to speak. "It's a good thing to get rid of evil in the world, but I also need to have some way to convince the Radiants. After all, as Virgil Huxley just pointed out, I can imagine." Then Kevin paused before getting to his main point. "Blade Mountain is going to be a real problem for us." When they heard this, the leaders of the 3 families all became silent, but they all understood one thing very clearly. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. There had to be some kind of catch.
Kevin, what do you think the Radiance needs in order to make a move?
Richard Swinton inquired very seriously. Invite the Radiance to St. Louis. Kevin offered his simple solution. In an instant, Virgil Huxley and the others' expressions became extremely solemn. The people of Blade Mountain were like a hungry wolf, but the Radiance was also very hungry too. Ever since its establishment, the Radiance had wiped out all the evil forces of both Chicago and Detroit, and they had even helped a lot of poor people along the way. This certainly increased their popularity. However, this didn't mean that the Radiance didn't have any ambitions. If they came up with other plans after seeing St. Louis, wouldn't Grandpa Thompson and the others be going from the frying pan into the fire? You should all think it over. It's the only way I can persuade the Radiance to travel here from thousands of miles away. Kevin wasn't in a hurry to ask them for a reply. Blade Mountain was simply too far away from the Radiance. It would only tarnish his reputation to spread himself out so thin. If there wasn't much practical significance, Kevin wouldn't do something that required a lot of effort. Besides, he still had less than 2 months before going to the capital to participate in the Herbalist Society's competition. If he didn't take advantage of this period of time to establish a solid base for the Radiance, what kind of foundation would he have to fight against the evil forces in the future? Above all, they couldn't keep a low profile. After all, Detroit and Chicago were too small. If the Radiance couldn't take this small step, they wouldn't have much hope to distinguish themselves in the future.
We can't give you a direct answer regarding your question, Kevin, but can you really guarantee that you can convince the Radiance?
Richard Swinton suddenly asked him. As long as the major leaders of St. Louis agree to this condition, I guarantee that the Radiance will send someone here tomorrow, Kevin announced confidently. Gail rolled her eyes at him, but due to her father and the current situation, she couldn't say anything.
Give us one night to discuss it.
Richard Swinton stared into Kevin's eyes as he made his request. For some reason, he felt that there was something crucial that he didn't know about his godson. Thornton looked deep into Kevin's eyes too. How could he not know about the Radiance? During the few days he spent with the Radiance, he'd witnessed how Kenneth Wilkinson treated the people around him with respect. Although he'd never seen Kenneth Wilkinson before, he was sure of one thing. Kevin was one of the higher-ups of the Radiance and had an unimaginably high rank. The Radiance! Grandpa Thompson muttered this name thoughtfully. Thornton, take Kyle Thompson with you and inform the guests. After the banquet is over, the three of us will have a talk with them. Virgil Huxley gave out a stern order. If anyone dares not come, they will be outcast in St. Louis.
Yes, Father.
Thornton stood up immediately and left the table along with Kyle. Kevin took a bottle and poured wine for everyone at the table. In her office at the Herbalist Society in Chicago, Nadia Alexander violently threw the blanket she was holding in her hand onto the ground. 5 or 6 of her subordinates took a knee in front of her. How many days have gone by? You still can't find out anything about Kevin's whereabouts? Is this how I trained you? Are you just a bunch of stooges? Nadia Alexander asked them angrily. They all hung their heads down and didn't dare to answer. I'm not afraid to tell you all. We've only been given a month. If I can't find Kevin, things will end very badly for the Midwest branch. Nadia Alexander's chest heaved up and down violently as she shouted at them. The Herbalist Society's top leadership had given her a strict order. No matter what method she used, she had to find Kevin. Even if she couldn't win him over, she had to get all the pill recipes from him. The rise of the Radiance had made a huge impact on the Herbalist Society. Nadia Alexander sat down angrily in her chair. When she thought about the scene that had played out at the headquarters, she was so scared that her hands started to shake. When was she ever going to catch a break? Nadia Alexander had been in her office angrily chastising her subordinates for not being able to track down Kevin. If they failed their mission, the Midwest chapter of the Herbalist Society would suffer grave consequences. Suddenly, the office door was pushed open. One of the branch elders ran in and knelt on the ground in front of her. He said excitedly,
Madam President, I found some news about Kevin.
"Where is he?" Nadia Alexander quickly asked.
A few days ago, Kevin appeared in Detroit with the young master of the Huxley family, Thornton, and he caused a huge disturbance at the Hayes family wedding. After snatching away the bride, Phoebe Anderson, the people of the Radiance massacred the entire Hayes family and half of the wealthy and aristocratic elite of the city of Detroit. The elder gave her a general overview of the information he just gathered. The Huxley family? The Radiance? Nadia Alexander frowned when she heard this. When did Kevin get involved with the Radiance? Nadia thought to herself. She'd heard about what happened in Detroit on the way back. Now the Radiance had almost taken over everything in the city. Furthermore, she was very clear about the situation in the Huxley family. Although they were a big family in St. Louis, they had absolutely no relationship with the Radiance. "Where is Kevin now?" Nadia asked in a panic. After the Hayes family was destroyed, Phoebe returned to Chicago under the escort of some Radiance members. She's now living with Kevin's wife in his penthouse suite at Corwin Tower.
The elder tried in vain to answer her question. "But where is Kevin right now? Tell me, what's the use of talking about Phoebe?" Nadia angrily slapped her forehead with her hand.
According to my information, Kevin should have returned to St. Louis with Thornton Huxley by now.
The elder quickly replied. A trace of doubt flashed across Nadia Alexander's eyes. She suddenly thought of something. Wasn't today Grandpa Thompson's birthday party? Perhaps Kevin had reached an invitation from the Thompson family. When she thought about it, Nadia immediately began giving them instructions. "Quickly book the fastest flight for me tonight. I'll be going to St. Louis right away." As she walked to the door, Nadia thought of something else. She stopped and turned around. "The rest of you need to go to the Corwin Tower apartment immediately. No matter what, you must get Phoebe and Lily in your hands."
"Yes, Madam President."
The elders quickly promised to do as she'd ordered. The banquet had ended half an hour before at the Thompson family's mansion in St. Louis. The family elders were discussing something in the hall while Kevin and the younger family members were sitting in the courtyard. Under the resentful gaze of Thornton and Gail, Brenda and Kevin were chatting and joking around while Kyle sat nearby sipping a drink. Suddenly, Kevin's phone rang. He knew that it was Spencer when he saw the number. "I have to take this call." Kevin put down his snack and stepped away from everyone to have some privacy. Brenda looked at his back and suddenly got a strange look in her eyes. "Sis, what are you looking at?" Gail nudged her sister with her shoulder. "I'm not looking at anything." Brenda quickly looked away and lowered her head. "Sis, you don't really like that country bumpkin, do you?" Gail suddenly realized. "You can't possibly like him. Look at the horrible shape his body is in. He's not good looking enough for you. Only Mr. Huxley is the right match for you. Actually, Kyle Thompson is also a very good match." "What nonsense are you talking about?" Brenda pinched her sister's arm. "Ouch, that hurts. If you don't believe me, ask Mr. Huxley and see if I'm wrong." Gail quickly gave Thornton a meaningful look. Thornton looked back at her sweetly.
"Gail is right. I really like you, Brenda. You don't need to think about that bastard Kyle. Give me a chance and I'll treat you very well."
Kyle spat out his drink when he heard him say that.
"Hey, Thornton, is there something wrong with you? Why are you always looking for trouble?"
Kyle asked unhappily.
"I'm looking for love. What's wrong with that?"
Thornton retorted. The children of the three families other than Gail had grown up from childhood to adulthood, so they had similar values.
"Wait a second, Kyle. Have you already become Kevin's student?" Thornton suddenly asked.
"Of course.
Why do you think I have such a good mentor? Are you jealous?"
Kyle replied proudly.
"I'm not jealous at all. As a matter of fact, I'm friends with Kevin. So if you're his student, does that mean that you're one generation younger than me?"
The more Thornton talked about it, the more he thought about it. His mood, which had been low for the whole night, suddenly improved.
"Bullshit! There's no way I'm going to treat you like my superior."
Kyle looked like he wanted to kill Thornton. "Don't be angry, Kyle. I think what Mr. Huxley said is quite true." Gail seemed to understand what he was getting at.
"Sure. Did I really say anything wrong? Thornton opened his palms and gave him an innocent look. Are you looking for a beating? Kyle squeezed his fist like he was getting ready to punch him. Calm down, man. As your elder, I won't be too hard on you, Thornton said happily. He'd been bullied by Kyle for more than 20 years. Tonight, he finally stood up to vent his anger. Suddenly, he also felt that Kevin wasn't that annoying anymore. Don't be so proud of yourself, kid. Wait until I beat the shit out of you. Kyle immediately got up and threw him onto the ground, then he started punching him. Kevin didn't pay any attention to the fight that was going on. He walked to a quiet place and answered his phone call. Why are you calling me so late at night? Did something happen? Kevin asked with a serious expression. Chancellor, we have a small problem. We've already saved Norman Steele and his people. It looks like Miranda and Norman Steele had secretly arranged for people to protect them. Spencer scratched his head and didn't know how to explain the rest. Did you have a problem saving them? Tell me what happened, Kevin asked insistently. There was indeed a small problem, and our people took care of it. All the members of the Steele family suffered superficial injuries, but Dalton Steele was unfortunately seriously injured. The doctor said that it was a miracle that he could survive until now, Spencer reported in a low voice. What did you say? Kevin gripped his phone tightly and his body emitted a biting cold energy. I've asked the Steele family's household staff. It seems that Dalton Steele was beaten very badly, Spencer reported respectfully. Does she really think I'm afraid of her? Kevin said while gnashing his teeth in anger. Chancellor, please don't get angry. I haven't finished my report yet. When Dylan Hill was attending to Dalton Steele's wounds, he found that there were two different types of energy in the man's body. Something is actually repairing his injuries, but he still hasn't fully recovered yet. This was a very unusual situation, so Spencer didn't know quite how to report it. Next time, why don't you lead with the important part? Kevin asked him sadly. Yes, Chancellor, and I'll definitely complete the mission. Spencer smiled embarrassingly. There isn't anything else to report, so I'll let you get some rest. My apologies for disturbing you. Spencer immediately hung up the phone and rolled his eyes. What a stressful phone call that had been. Look at you. How can you feel so guilty even when you call the Chancellor? Dylan Hill leaned against the wall and teased him. Because Kevin valued Dalton so much, they were taking turns guarding the detention room. You still have the nerve to say that to me? Then why didn't you make the call yourself? Spencer grumbled unhappily. Nonsense. Don't tell me I'm not afraid of the Chancellor, Dylan Hill replied very grimly. The very idea made Spencer anxious, but he also felt that what Dylan Hill said made sense. Was there anybody in the Radiance who wasn't afraid of the Chancellor? Kevin called Miranda and explained the situation to her. He told her not to worry and to stay at the Williams Company for a few days to avoid any publicity. In fact, Kevin more or less had some guesses about the two forces that were at work in Dalton's body. They were most likely the gold gemstone in Travis Adams' cultivation base, which had been passed on to him. I'll definitely get back at the Williams family in the Union the first chance I get, Kevin swore while gripping his phone tightly. Meanwhile, in the Thompson family's mansion's meeting room, Richard Swinton and Virgil Huxley were discussing the situation in detail. Many of the most influential people in St. Louis were deep in thought. There was no doubt that the Radiance was very powerful, but if they were allowed to move in and take over the city, things would get very awkward. You've been quiet for too long. Will you come to a decision or not? Mr. Williams is still waiting for an answer outside so he can negotiate with the Radiance. Grandpa Thompson looked around and asked them all in a loud voice. I think only the Radiance can save St. Louis now, one of the business leaders remarked. But who can guarantee that they won't turn against us in the future? Another one asked timidly. St. Louis has been focusing on business for years and years. Even the Herbalist Society never broke this rule. Does the Radiance want to be the first to do it? Someone wondered out loud. But St. Louis has no herbal underground. This has been going on for decades.
but the Blade Mountain bandits are taking their toll on us. We can't afford to suffer such a huge loss," the woman in the seat next to him remarked. The large group of people continued discussing their options amongst themselves. It was tough to get complete agreement, though. Richard Swinton and Virgil Huxley exchanged a glance. They could see a trace of distress in each other's eyes. Although they were the leaders of their families, they couldn't force any of these people to do anything against their will. Basically, the more powerful a family was, the more important their reputation was. Consequently, it would be hard for them to avoid getting involved. About 10 minutes later, Grandpa Thompson slapped his hand heavily on his armrest to get everyone's attention.
"The discussion has gone on long enough. What have you decided?"
Grandpa Thompson saw no reason to be polite to these people anymore.
"There's one thing I want to explain to you first. All three of us support accepting the Radiants in St. Louis. Our only other option is to be eliminated by them."
Those who had objections slightly narrowed their eyes and muttered to themselves.
"If the three of you are on the same side, what chance do the rest of us have?" At this point, those who agree with us don't need to say anything else. Those who have objections should stand up and say what you think, Richard Swinton announced loudly. In fact, the people he hated the most were those who said there was no herbal underground in St. Louis. If there really was no herbalism in St. Louis, then what was the Swinton family? Chopped liver? In any case, something had to be done about this. After a lot of discussion, the top business leaders of St. Louis still hadn't decided if they would allow the Radiants to control their city. Even after seeing Kevin wipe out 2 men for disagreeing with him, they had their reservations. Finally, Richard Swinton gave them an ultimatum. If anyone still disagreed, they had to speak up right now. Silence means consent. The entire room became deathly quiet. These people understood what the 3 great families meant to them. In the eyes of the citizens of St. Louis, they were all just well-dressed people who belonged to the upper class, but they were also in control of the rise and fall of many people. But the people also knew that nobody was allowed to do anything without freely following state and federal laws. Unfortunately, the Radiance was even more terrifying than the prospect of prison. So even if anyone was very unwilling, they didn't want to be the first to stand up and be noticed. After a few minutes of silence, a middle-aged man in his late 40s finally stood up. Richard Swinton and Thornton narrowed their eyes slightly when they saw him. They knew this man. He was Jeremy Long, the leader of the Long family, one of the most powerful in all of St. Louis. The Long family had been developing rapidly over the past few years. Although they hadn't reached the level of a superfamily yet, they were much stronger than even a first-class family.
"I wonder what ideas you may have to share with us."
Grandpa Thompson's tone was neither warm nor angry. Because of that, no one could tell what kind of attitude he had.
"Grandpa Thompson, you're senior to me. I don't mean to offend you on your birthday. However, for the sake of St. Louis's future, I have no choice but to stand up and give you my opinion on this."
Jeremy Long was quite polite.
"Mr. Long, just say what you want to say."
Grandpa Thompson looked down slightly and didn't even make eye contact with him. No matter how polite Jeremy Long was, as long as he was speaking out, it could only mean that he was going against the Thompson family. Jeremy smiled sadly when he saw Grandpa Thompson's attitude and said,
"Our city has been a business powerhouse for over a century,
and that's why we have an economy that surpasses the other cities in the Midwest. Even if there are herbalists and powerful underground martial artists, they've always kept to the shadows. But this doesn't mean that there is no one like that in all of St. Louis," he continued. "We all know the situation at Blade Mountain very well. But why must we seek help from the Radiants? Could it be that we've gathered all the most powerful people from the major families together? Can't we defeat them ourselves? Some of the people in the room immediately nodded in agreement.
I think that what Mr. Long just said makes sense. It's not like we really don't have anybody who can handle this problem, it's just that we haven't been taking any chances, one of the business people declared.
We'll send someone to flatten Blade Mountain ourselves, the woman next to him shouted.
It's not like we're really afraid of those bandits. If we don't take care of them, do they really think we'll just roll over and die?
Another man asked. Richard Swinton and the other two men's faces looked especially serious when they heard these passionate words. It was really something to see this group of 40 and 50-year-old men and women get so motivated to act. However, it was obvious that Jeremy had ulterior motives. In St. Louis, only the three great families possessed the strength that would be needed for this kind of fight. If they were to send their own people, they would definitely have to pay a painful price. Jeremy wanted to use this opportunity to kill someone and diminish the strength of the three great families.
Grandpa Thompson, what do you think of my idea?
Jeremy smiled proudly and asked him.
After all, St. Louis is our home. It has nothing to do with the Radiants. Besides, we can only slice the pie in so many pieces. Why should we give anything to outsiders? If Blade Mountain is handled, not only will we be able to stabilize our supply chain, but the reputation of St. Louis itself will also rise. There's no need to give such a golden opportunity to the Radiants.
Virgil Huxley let out a snort of disdain.
Do you think we'll win if we send our own men against them? If we suffer heavy casualties and don't achieve the expected result, who will bear the responsibility?
His response was like a bucket of cold water, which put out the flames that had just risen up in everyone's body. Those who still had objections secretly did a quick calculation. They didn't have as many assets as the three great families to begin with, and every time they developed a family member through herbal medicine and martial training, they would have to put in a lot of effort and expense. The current situation wasn't easy for them. If they failed because of the thieves at Blade Mountain, then they would end up having to start over again with absolutely nothing. When that time came, they would be eaten alive by the three great families if the others didn't slaughter them first.
So what Mr. Huxley is saying is that we have to let the fox into the henhouse.
Jeremy had a frustrated look on his face.
Why do you think we're letting the fox into the henhouse? If the Radiants can actually destroy the Blade Mountain bandits and take charge of St. Louis, who would dare to challenge us in the future?
Richard Swinton asked bluntly. Some of the people thought that Richard's point made a lot of sense. After all, the three major families always had St. Louis' best interest in mind.
I support letting the Radiances move into St. Louis, one of them shouted excitedly. Grandpa Thompson, just tell Mr. Williams that we agree and let him invite the Radiants in, the man next to him exclaimed. I can't stand the people who have taken over Blade Mountain. Finally, someone can take care of them once and for all, one of the other business leaders agreed.
More and more people jumped on board, which made Jeremy's expression turn even gloomier. Meanwhile, in Kevin's apartment in Chicago, Phoebe and Lily were sitting on the sofa discussing the beautiful skirt Lily had bought while shopping that day. The two women had quickly formed a good relationship with each other. They would go shopping, chit-chat, talk about celebrities, and sometimes even world politics. After just an hour or two, they got along like they were best friends. Suddenly, the front door was roughly knocked open, scaring the two young women so much that they jumped up out of the sofa. In the next second, dozens of tall and sturdy men ran into the living room. Who are you? Phoebe looked calm and alert on the outside, but inside she was in a panic.
May I ask if you are Phoebe Anderson and Lily Williams, formerly from the Jones family?
The group's leader spoke very calmly but urgently. I'm Lily. Is there anything I can help you with? Lily sounded like she was keeping it together, but she was starting to look a little pale.
It's a good thing we found you. We're from the Herbalist Society. Please cooperate with us and things will go very smoothly, the man ordered them.
Why should we follow you?" Phoebe took deep breaths and forced herself to remain calm. "Get out of here immediately or I'll call the police. Do you know that you're trespassing on private property?" The man sighed and waved his hand gently in the air.
"It looks like you're going to make things difficult. Now you two ladies have offended me."
A cloud of mist came out from his sleeve and knocked the two women unconscious.
"Pick them up and take them away,"
the man ordered his men before he turned around and left the apartment. 10 minutes later, at the Archer family's mansion, Gwen Archer was about to go to sleep when suddenly one of her subordinates ran in. "If you don't knock on the door before you come in next time, you won't have your hands anymore." Gwen growled at him.
Yes, ma'am, but something has happened."
The man wiped the cold sweat from his forehead as he spoke to her. "If you have something to say it quickly." Gwen was always very decisive and didn't like to wait to get to the point.
"Someone took Lily and Phoebe away,"
the man reported to her anxiously. "What happened?" Gwen frowned as she wondered who was behind the abduction. Since Kevin said he wanted to take her as his private student, Gwen had arranged for people to observe every move the Jones family made 24 hours a day.
"I don't know exactly, but the people seem to be from the Herbalist Society."
The man braced himself for Gwen's reply.
"The Herbalist Society?"
Gwen Archer's expression changed. She rolled her eyes before she gave him new orders.
"Go and inform my brother immediately. Tell him that I have something important to discuss with him." "Yes, ma'am."
The man quickly left the room and ran off to contact Dominic Archer. After 2 hours of discussion, a large group of influential people left the Thompson family's mansion one after another. However, Kevin clearly noticed that their expressions had changed. A few of them were even frowning. In any case, nobody looked too happy about the turn of events. From this point on, Kevin could predict that Grandpa Thompson's conversation might not go very well. "Kevin, come in." Catherine stood at the door and called out to him. After Kevin went in and closed the door, Gail said disdainfully, "What is it? I really don't know why my father thinks so highly of him."
"Gail, you have to be more careful when you speak. Mr. Williams is now my mentor."
Kyle Thompson looked over at her and tried to persuade her to weigh her words. In fact, it was also a bit of a warning. "Kyle, why are you helping that country bumpkin anyway? What can he possibly teach you?" Gail pouted unhappily. "I think you might as well do what Thornton did and become Nadia Alexander's student." "Don't talk nonsense, Gail." Brenda pulled her younger sister toward her. Brenda knew that her sister was still young and inexperienced. There were some things that she just didn't understand. For a family like the Thompsons, there were many times in the past when they'd found themselves in a bad position. They wielded power that ordinary people couldn't dream of, but they had to strictly abide by the law, as well as some rules that prevented any of the family members from joining any of the herbal medicine schools or doing any training. This was also the reason why Grandpa Thompson guessed that Kevin might be one of the senior members of the Radiants, but only asked Kyle to acknowledge him as his mentor, and not actually join the Radiants himself. When Kevin came in, Richard Swinton asked him to take a seat, but the expressions on everyone's faces didn't look good. Kevin got straight to the point and asked Richard, "Didn't they agree to join the Radiants?" At this critical juncture, he didn't have time to beat around the bush.
"Most of them agree, but Jeremy Long is too cunning. He was talking about the future of St. Louis. He said it wasn't good for us to restrain them too much."
Virgil Huxley was really angry. No one had expected Jeremy to be so disrespectful to the leaders of the three families. However, neither the Huxley family nor the Swinton family could do anything to the Long family because of this. Otherwise, their reputation would be tarnished, since they would be seen as bullying the weak. If both families had their hands tied, then the Thompson family, which had a very high status, wouldn't be able to do anything to Jeremy Long either. "Jeremy?" Kevin didn't hide the fury in his eyes as he said, "I want to ask you two something. If St. Louis didn't have the Long family anymore, would that bother anyone?"
"The ones who objected were basically aligned with the Long family. If not,
Before Richard could finish what he was saying, he realized what Kevin meant. "Kevin, don't tell me you want to do that," Catherine asked in surprise. "It's good that everyone understands. There's no need to say it out loud," Kevin replied in a very relaxed manner. "Father, Mr. Thompson and Mr. Huxley, it will only take you 10 minutes. Take care of it. After that, tell me the location of the Long family. I'll go and have a good talk with them later on."
"No problem, Mr. Williams."
Herman Thompson had been through a lot, so he naturally wouldn't be afraid of this kind of solution, no matter how disturbing. The most influential families in St. Louis weren't completely convinced that they should let the Radiants control the city. When Kevin found out that Jeremy Long had swayed some of them, he considered getting rid of the Long family. That would open the way for the other families to approve of a deal with the Radiants. So Kevin was going to have a talk with Jeremy.
"Kevin, do your best,"
Richard Swinton advised him with concern in his eyes.
"Mr. Swinton is right, Mr. Williams. You have to think it through. The Long family is one of the most important in St. Louis, after all. If they were to object, I'm afraid it would cause a lot of trouble,"
Virgil Huxley said as if he was deep in thought. "Don't worry at all. I'll talk to Jeremy about those shares later. If he's unwilling, I won't force him," Kevin assured them with a serious expression. However, no one was willing to believe his words. Would someone really go looking for someone in the middle of the night to have a heart-to-heart talk with them? It was obvious that Kevin wanted to kill the man. The Thompson family was very efficient. They were able to prepare the transfer contracts in 20 minutes. Kevin waved goodbye to Richard Swinton and the others, then left the Thompson mansion with a smile on his face.
"Mr. Swinton, you really have a fine son."
Virgil Huxley looked in the direction where Kevin had just disappeared and let out a heavy sigh. He didn't understand something, though. Kevin was about the same age as Thornton, but he had a calmness that was rare in his peers. Richard Swinton proudly raised his chin and replied,
"He's a fine young man, isn't he? But before Kevin returns, we ought to arrange the details for the Radiants to settle down in St. Louis."
"There's no rush. I believe Mr. Williams already has a plan in mind."
Virgil Huxley leaned back in his chair with a mysterious look in his eyes.
"Actually, I don't know if it's good or bad to invite the Radiants here." "You don't need to worry about those unimportant things."
Herman Thompson took a sip of coffee and thought out loud.
"Mr. Williams won't stay in St. Louis for long."
"What do you mean by that?"
Richard Swinton narrowed his eyes and asked him to explain himself.
"Do you know what happens when a ram is introduced among a herd of sheep?"
Herman Thompson said in a low voice. Virgil Huxley's eyes grew bigger when he heard that. As far as he could recall, no one had ever received such a high compliment from Herman Thompson. There was a luxurious mansion on the outskirts of St. Louis. Although it couldn't compare to a place like the Thompson family's estate, it was still a magnificent home. Under the bright light, Jeremy and the other three men's faces looked grim, causing the atmosphere in the room to seem cold and silent. Suddenly, Jeremy threw his wine glass into the fireplace.
"That Herman Thompson is really acting foolish. Why can't he see what's obviously going on?"
"Grandpa Thompson is old, and it's inevitable that he'll have some memory lapses. Plus, he sees that young man Kevin as his savior. So it's reasonable for the Thompson family to support the Radiants."
Bernie Ross, who was from one of the less important families in St. Louis, nodded in agreement.
"But the problem is, hasn't the Huxley family always had a close relationship with the Swintons? Something's changed, and I'd like to know what it is."
Dennis Ryder, the head of the Ryder family, said in a low voice. As soon as these words left his lips, everyone frowned again.
"If we choose to invite the Radiants here, what chance will any of us have?"
Jeremy rubbed his temples in frustration. Suddenly, Anthony Berger, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said,
"If you really don't want the Radiants to come here, I have an idea. I just don't know if you'd be willing to try it."
"What were you thinking of doing? Tell me quickly."
Jeremy's eyes lit up as he hastily asked for the details. For Jeremy, turning the Longs into a superfamily had been his long-desired wish for many years. However, they'd always been held back by the three great families. That was why he had no way to display his talents. Now, someone had suddenly told him that there was a way forward. How could Jeremy not be excited about it?
"Please calm down. In my opinion, the reason why the three families were able to stand on the same side tonight is all because of that young man named Kevin. On the way back from the Thompson family's home, I sent someone to investigate him. I found out that Kevin was the son-in-law of a family in Chicago. It was just a coincidence that he met some rich people," Anthony explained calmly. "I guess the reason why the three families are supporting him is that Kevin has connections, so he's able to contact the Radiants. If we don't know who he is, I'm sure we can get rid of him easily, no matter how capable the three families are. We have to do everything we can to avoid inviting the Radiants to St. Louis," Anthony Berger declared confidently.
Jeremy clapped his hands and replied excitedly,
"Great idea. We can't deal with the three major families, but can we handle a lowly son-in-law?"
"You don't need to trouble yourself with such a small matter. Tomorrow I'll send someone to find Kevin and lure him into our plan."
Bernie Ross was eager to have a chance to show his loyalty.
"Actually, you can leave this matter to me. Don't worry, Mr. Long, I'll make the arrangements for you and I'll call someone right away,"
Dennis Ryder promised. He was so excited he couldn't contain himself.
"Everyone, please calm down. Since I came up with the idea, it's only natural that I should deal with Kevin. Mr. Long only needs to find some excuse to delay the three families. Just create an alibi,"
Anthony Berger insisted with great confidence. The three of them were the leaders of the second-rate families in St. Louis. It was just that they'd been trailing behind the Long family for the past few years. As long as they helped the Long family with this serious problem, they expected to reap the benefits. Jeremy thought for a moment and said,
"The three of you don't need to fight for this. I've decided to meet with this Kevin guy personally. Your families are still too weak," he explained. "If you don't handle the situation properly and the three families decide to pursue you, you won't be able to withstand the pressure."
Dennis Ryder smiled and patted Jeremy on the shoulder.
"You really do value friendship and loyalty, always thinking about our well-being. Don't worry, the three of us will go find Kevin tomorrow morning."
Then they all heard a booming voice saying, "You don't have to look for me tomorrow. I'm already here." The voice startled the men. Then the expressions on their faces changed drastically. The four of them slowly turned their heads in the direction of the voice. They saw Kevin holding a folder in his hand. He was leisurely leaning with his back against the wall. There was a mocking smile on his face. No one even knew he was in the room, and they certainly didn't know how long he'd been standing there. Dennis Ryder was so scared that he jumped up from the sofa. "Don't stop. You guys go ahead with your business first. I'm not in any hurry." Kevin had a devious smile. Jeremy smiled incredibly awkwardly, mainly because he just really wanted to cry.
"Aren't you Mr. Williams? During Grandpa Thompson's party, I was sitting at the table next to you. Why have you decided to come here?"
Kevin raised an eyebrow when he heard that. He was certain that Jeremy was telling a lie without even blinking. At Grandpa Thompson's party, Kevin was sitting at the main table and there were no other tables beside him. "I'm here to talk to you about something. First, tell me how to set the trap so I can prepare in advance. Otherwise, I won't be able to help you with your plan." Kevin smiled faintly.
"You have a great sense of humor, Mr. Williams. Mr. Ryder and the others were just joking."
Jeremy smiled apologetically and tried to smooth things over. He was able to recognize Kevin because he'd seen him with the Thompson family. At that time, he was surprised by the fact that Kevin was allowed to sit beside Brenda and the rest of the members of the Thompson family. That was why he remembered what he looked like. However, he didn't expect that this young man, whom he'd never met before, would come to him on his own. "I don't like to joke around," Kevin replied shamelessly. "I know you guys are playing with me, but I have to be serious with you right now. The four of you can sign this agreement and I'll consider it as compensation for offending me." After he said this, Kevin threw the file folder in his hand onto the table. Dennis Ryder and the others looked at the folder, wondering what it could possibly contain. Jeremy frowned slightly and thought for a while before slowly opening it. "You want us to transfer our shares for free?" Jeremy suddenly looked up and stared at Kevin, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He said, "Mr. Williams, that's one hell of a joke." "Oh, do you think I'm joking with you?" Kevin replied mockingly as he looked him straight in the eye. "Mr. Williams, it's pretty late at night. I should be honored to have you as a guest, but what do you mean by that? If you're here to joke with me, then please come back another time. It's getting late and I really should rest." The look on Jeremy's face revealed his desperation. "As long as you insist, I won't joke around with you anymore." Kevin slowly stood up. "You'd better sign this document tonight. Otherwise, don't blame me for what happens." The atmosphere became very serious, and there was even a hint of death in the air. "Mr. Williams, are you serious? This is St. Louis, not Chicago, and you're still on my turf. If I don't want you here, I can order someone to kick you out at any time." Jeremy was gripping the document more and more tightly, and his knuckles began to turn white. "You still think I'm joking with you?" Kevin sneered and waved his right hand. The men saw a cold flash of light. Since he'd taken the golden pill that the Night King gave him, Kevin had reached an unprecedented level of strength. And on top of that, the Night Dagger had also undergone a tremendous change. Compared to before, the Night Dagger had become sharper, and it even gave off a terrifying luster, especially at night. Jeremy and the other three men's hearts skipped a beat. For some reason, they didn't dare to look directly at the blade in Kevin's hand. "Mr. Williams, you better not act recklessly. No matter how powerful you are, this country still has laws." Jeremy was clearly panicking. "Mr. Long is right. St. Louis isn't a place where trash like you can act recklessly. Don't forget that this isn't your hometown," Dennis Ryder suddenly shouted to bolster his courage.
"Listen up, Williams. I'm standing up to you right now, and I don't believe that you'd ever dare to do anything out of line to us."
Bernie Ross gritted his teeth as he took a step forward. He obviously wasn't afraid of Kevin, and he meant business.
"You only have the courage to act like this because of the Radiance. Don't forget that you're just a worthless son-in-law. The head of the Long family only allowed you to come into this place out of the kindness of his heart. If you know what's good for you, you'll get the hell out of here and you won't force us to make a move."
Anthony Berger raised his chin arrogantly as he pointed his finger at Kevin. After the three of them had spoken one after another, the room suddenly fell silent. Kevin looked at the three of them like they were the biggest fools he'd ever seen in his life. Seeing that Kevin wasn't going to reply, Dennis Ryder and the others thought that he'd admitted defeat. They all smiled proudly now that they'd put him in his place. "Fear can be your friend. St. Louis is nothing like Chicago. This wasn't the right place for you to be so rash. For the sake of the Radiance, get the hell out of here right now. We just might decide to spare your worthless life." Dennis Ryder crossed his arms in front of his chest and acted very full of himself.
"How could a useless son-in-law even think of talking to us like that? Does he really think he's someone important?"
Anthony Berger sneered contemptuously.
"Without the Radiance to back you up, you wouldn't be anything at all. You've got some nerve coming in here and talking to us like that."
Bernie Ross slowly picked up his glass and took a sip while he continued to insult Kevin.
"The head of the Long family has been treating you like a human being. That's why he calls you Mister. But he doesn't have to listen to you at all. You're just a worthless bottom feeder."
After Bernie Ross finished speaking, there was a cold flash of light in the room. No one could clearly see exactly how Kevin attacked. Jeremy thought that Kevin was only trying to scare them, but Bernie Ross suddenly let out a muffled groan. A second later, a bright red thread spurted out from his neck. Ross fell to the ground before he could even struggle. Blood stained the floor beneath his body. Dennis Ryder and the others were stunned by Kevin's sudden movement.
He really dared to make a move against us?
Jeremy's eyeballs almost popped out of his head. Although Bernie Ross was Jeremy's subordinate, he was still a respectable figure in St. Louis, and Jeremy knew that the man wouldn't be that easy to kill.
You're the son-in-law of Trash from the countryside. How dare you kill Mr. Ross?
Dennis Ryder was so shocked that he couldn't even speak clearly. He was blabbering too much. If I hadn't shut him up, he would have kept talking until dawn. Kevin pointed at the documents on the table and continued. Now you know I'm not joking with you guys, right? If you don't want to see any more blood tonight, you'd better sign it.
Mr. Williams, you've gone too far. Even the Radiants might not be able to protect you now.
Jeremy warned him with a ferocious sneer on his face. However, he wasn't wrong. If Kevin had simply gone there and argued with them, he could have said that they just had a difference of opinions. But now that blood had been spilled, the situation was completely different. Kevin had definitely broken the law. Did I go too far? And what were you scheming to do to me? What's wrong with me making the first move? Kevin waved his dagger in the air and continued. Did you expect me to just wait around for you to attack me? After saying this, Kevin suddenly paused and the smile on his face became a malicious snarl. Other than the three of you, would anyone else know that I've even been here tonight? Jeremy Long's eyes grew wide when he heard this. Kevin's meaning was very clear. If they didn't sign the agreement obediently and if they didn't keep what happened that evening a secret, he would slaughter the entire Long family.
Mr. Williams, please stop. There are some things you cannot say carelessly.
Jeremy wasn't sure whether Kevin would do what he said, but at least he knew one thing. He could tell from Kevin's attack that his training base was far higher than his. More importantly, there was something very wrong with the information Anthony Berger had received about him. Kevin was not at all what he seemed to be. I'm not just talking nonsense, and I can assure you, if you don't sign the agreement, then the famous Long family will be gone by tomorrow morning. Kevin smiled and showed them the night dagger in his hand. Looking at the innocent smile on Kevin's face, Jeremy felt a chill run down his spine.
Do you really want to do this, Mr. Williams?
Jeremy had a very sour look on his face. I don't want to waste any more of my time here with you, Kevin said impatiently. How late is it? I still need to go back and get some sleep.
Remember it, Mr. Williams, you forced me to do this.
Jeremy suddenly slapped Kevin a few times and he had a ferocious look in his eyes.
You've really pushed me too far.
When he stopped speaking, dozens of powerful men and women quickly rushed into the hall from all directions. Kevin was completely surrounded. These people were all dressed in the same uniform, and the evil aura they emitted added to their lethal look. So, this is the trump card your Long family holds? Kevin asked with a playful smile. His eyes swept across the people one by one.
I didn't want things to turn out like this either.
Jeremy suddenly waved his hand as he said.
These people are experts who have been nurtured and trained by my family for many years. Although they can't be compared to the Radiants, I don't think it will be a problem for them to keep you here.
Kevin didn't say anything in reply. The weakest of the Long family's people was a level 2 expert. Sure enough, people are different everywhere you go. The most powerful family in St. Louis certainly is different from a Chicago or New York family, Kevin thought to himself.
We're definitely not people you can toy with, Anthony Berger sneered.
Then he challenged Kevin and asked him,
Do you really think that the people of St. Louis are all weaklings and puppets?
You've bitten off more than you can chew here.
Dennis Ryder clenched his fists and shouted loudly.
"Tonight we'll defend our city with our very lives. Do you really think you're so powerful? Believe it or not, as soon as Jeremy Long gives the order, we'll definitely make mincemeat out of you."
At first, the two of them were frightened by Kevin's capabilities. However, Jeremy had called out dozens of his bodyguards, which had given them a lot of courage all of a sudden. Sometimes having more people is a good thing, because it can give someone a lot of confidence. "I think you're depending too much on these people." A bright light seemed to burst out from Kevin's eyes, and in the next second, he started moving like lightning. No one could clearly see how he attacked. They could only see the blur of his blade slashing out in all directions in the large room. One after another, the Long family's martial experts fell to the ground in heaps. Dennis Ryder, Anthony Berger, and Jeremy Long were all stunned by what they saw. They just stood there with their mouths hanging open, unable to comprehend what was happening. Jeremy's heart sank as he watched Kevin slice through his personal army. How much training had it taken to get all of them to their current level of expertise? Not to mention the enormous expense. The time and effort spent were beyond the means of most ordinary people. It would be almost impossible for Jeremy to replicate it and start over again with new trainees. At the same time, it was because of his confidence in these people that Jeremy could speak so firmly when facing powerful leaders like Richard Swinton and the others. However, what Kevin was doing now had almost broken all of Jeremy's hopes for the future. In less than 2 minutes, Kevin had returned to his original position, but dozens and dozens of the Long family's bodyguards were all lying on the ground. The floor of the enormous meeting room was stained red with blood, and the air was filled with its thick, sickening sweet smell. "Can we have a proper discussion now?" Kevin rubbed his shoulder a little, as if he'd just finished a brief workout. Dennis Ryder couldn't hold it in anymore. He turned his head and threw up in the trash can. Anthony Berger was so scared that his legs began to feel soft and rubbery. He kept trembling as if he could pee in his pants at any time. Jeremy's face turned pale as he looked at the dead bodies all over the room. The confidence in his heart had been completely replaced by terror. Jeremy felt like a large, invisible hand was grabbing his throat, making him unable to say anything. "Mr. Long, did you hear what I just said?" Kevin asked with a faint smile.
"Good. Yes. Good to negotiate, Mr. Williams."
Jeremy gulped as he wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. He didn't dare to argue with Kevin anymore. Dennis Ryder and Anthony Berger looked at Kevin as if they were staring at a devil. No one could clearly comprehend the fear in their hearts. Especially when they recalled how much they had been ridiculing Kevin, they felt as if their pants were wet. If they survived this encounter, they would definitely have to change their clothes. "So, do you want to sign or not?" Kevin raised his eyebrows and asked them again.
"Sign? Yes, I'll sign right away."
Jeremy grabbed the documents on the table, took out the pen from his suit pocket, and hurriedly signed his name. "What about the two of you?" Kevin asked the others.
"We'll sign it right away,"
Anthony Berger quickly replied.
"I've firmly supported the Radiants to move into St. Louis from the very beginning. Tomorrow I'll go and talk with any people who still have objections. If anyone dares to disagree, they'll be making things difficult for me."
Dennis Ryder tried to smile, but it was clear that he really wanted to cry. By the time Kevin left the Long family's mansion, it was already half an hour later. He asked Jeremy to take care of Bernie Ross's matter. Tomorrow morning, all of the Ross family properties would be transferred to the Radiants. Even though it was already late at night, Herman Thompson and the others still hadn't gone to bed. Richard Swinton and Virgil Huxley were anxiously pacing back and forth in the main room. Catherine's head was hanging down. No one could see her face and expression clearly.
"Can you please give me some room?"
Richard Swinton pushed Virgil Huxley's shoulder and angrily turned around to sit down on the chair. But he was so restless that he immediately stood up again.
"Mr. Williams has been gone for too long. Could something have happened to him?
Virgil Huxley wondered out loud. Then he quickly shook his head and dropped the idea.
Impossible. That old man Jeremy is definitely not a match for Mr. Williams. He'd better not try to play any tricks.
What are you talking about?
Richard Swinton asked, a little upset.
Why do you care about what I'm saying?
Virgil Huxley replied angrily. The two of them had been training and taking herbal medicine for many years, and they agreed completely on the next course of action. Kevin was the one who should contact the Radiants, and he was the one who could save St. Louis and at the same time reduce to a minimum the losses that the three families would suffer. On the contrary, if something were to happen to Kevin that night, not only would he not be able to get rid of the threat posed by the criminals at Blade Mountain, the entire city of St. Louis would also have to suffer the wrath of the Radiants.
I hope that Jeremy does the sensible thing and doesn't do anything stupid.
Virgil Huxley tightly clasped his hands together. He hadn't been this anxious in many years. Just then, a lone figure walked into the room. It immediately attracted the attention of all four of them. Grandpa Thompson had been sitting patiently and resting when his eyes suddenly snapped open.
How are you, Mr. Williams?
Virgil Huxley asked with a touch of concern in his voice. I'm okay. I had a good chat with the head of the Long family. He signed the letter very cooperatively, and Dennis Ryder and Anthony Berger were also there. Kevin calmly tossed the documents on the table. However, when they heard Kevin say this, Grandpa Thompson and the others got a little anxious. Staring at Kevin, they thought to themselves,
Why do you have to act so self-righteous? You're obviously lying to us. Your clothes are stained with blood, okay? Do you really think we can't see that?
Kevin stretched like he'd just been streaming movies all evening and was ready for bed. If there's nothing else, I'll go get some rest. It's getting late, so you guys should go get some sleep too. After saying that, he turned around and left the room. The rest of them just stood there in a daze. They could see the signed documents lying on the table and knew that they had an ironclad agreement.
The winds have started to change in St. Louis.
Grandpa Thompson took a deep breath and sighed. Virgil Huxley's eyes lit up. It seemed like he'd made the correct decision. As long as Kevin was successful, the Huxley family would definitely prosper for the next 100 years. The rest of the night passed very quickly. The next day, Nadia Alexander came to the Swinton family's home early in the morning. Seeing Kevin sitting at the table with sleepy eyes, Nadia began to have mixed emotions.
To what do we owe the pleasure of your presence?
Richard Swinton stood up and greeted Nadia with a smile. Thank you, Mr. Swinton. I'm here to see Mr. Williams. Nadia got straight to the point. Richard Swinton frowned when he heard her say that. He turned to look at Kevin, who was calmly drinking a cup of coffee. If it's convenient for you, Mr. Williams, I wonder if we can have a talk. Nadia's tone was somewhat distant.
I need to talk to Grandpa Thompson about something. Kevin, you can stay home and rest for a while.
Richard Swinton came up with what he thought was a plausible excuse and slipped away. Why don't you guys go and have some breakfast yourselves? Kevin said to the family servants as he politely gestured for them to leave.
Yes, sir.
The butler, the cook, and the others quickly walked out of the room. Soon, Kevin and Nadia were alone. They were both silent for a long time, and there was a slight tension in the air. Finally, Kevin was the first to break the silence. He put down what was left of his pastry and finished his coffee. Then he said, Nadia, if you need anything, just tell me. You obviously came here this early in the morning to find me, so what's on your mind? The chairman asked me to invite you to join the Herbalist Society. Nadia Alexander didn't dawdle and straightaway told him the reason for her visit. I remember telling you before that I won't join the Herbalist Society until I've had the time to consider it properly. Kevin wiped his mouth with his napkin and looked her right in the eyes. It's fine if you don't want to join, but the Herbalist Society needs the power pill, the stabilizing pill, and the formula for the life prolongation pill. Nadia was very serious as she listed everything that the society was hoping to get from Kevin. But would Kevin agree? The morning after Kevin forcibly got Jeremy Long and the others to agree to let the Radiants move into St. Louis, he was having breakfast at the Swinton Mansion. Nadia Alexander came in and asked to speak with Kevin in private. She asked him one more time to join the Herbalist Society. Even if he didn't join, she wanted Kevin to give them the power pill, the stabilizing pill, and the formula for the life prolongation pill. She knew that her words were very rude, but Nadia had no other choice. Her main concern was the life and death of thousands of people from the Herbalist Society's Midwest branch. Haha, don't you know that making a joke like that so early in the morning isn't funny? Kevin said sternly. Didn't I tell you before that as long as I'm not willing to give things freely, no one can take them away? Or does the Herbalist Society finally want to take action? Mr. Williams, keep in mind that I have a bargaining chip in this negotiation. Nadia hesitated for a few seconds, then took out her phone. Kevin didn't recognize where the image on the screen was from, but he definitely was familiar with the two people he saw on Nadia's phone. They were Lily and Phoebe. At that very moment, they were locked up and there were at least a dozen men guarding them. From the expressions on the two women's faces, you could clearly see how scared and helpless they were. Are you threatening me? Kevin shifted his gaze from the screen to Nadia. His eyes were filled with a lethal glare. Nadia sighed deeply and knelt down in front of Kevin. Mr. Williams, I had no choice. Please show mercy on me and do this. It's the only way to save my branch members. Kevin didn't say anything. He just looked at her quietly and he kept trying to figure out what kind of game she was playing. What mattered most to him was that Lily and Phoebe had been captured. As a result, Kevin no longer had any kind of positive impression about the Herbalist Society. Mr. Williams, I'm begging you. The chairman has given me a death order. If I don't get your pill formula, everyone in the Midwest branch will be executed. Nadia Alexander knelt on the ground and begged Kevin for mercy with tears streaming down her face. So you're thinking about other people and not yourself? Kevin asked her with a puzzled look on his face. Don't worry. Lily and Phoebe won't be hurt, Nadia quickly explained. In the Thompson family study, Herman Thompson was carefully reading the latest news on the computer. Joseph Thompson, Richard Swinton, and the rest of them were also in the room, and they had serious expressions on their faces. 10 minutes before, they received a reliable report that the Long family's elite bodyguards had all been killed. The head of the Ross family, Bernie Ross, had his throat slit by someone. And on top of everything, all the properties of the Ryder family and the Berger family had been transferred to the Radiants. To put it another way, before the Radiants had even arrived in St. Louis, they'd already extended their reach into the city's most powerful families. Mr. Williams is being too forceful. Now those people who were against him are angry, but they dare not say anything. Joseph Thompson suddenly said very solemnly, We're not the ones who invited the Radiants into our city, but there's nothing that can stop them now. Even if we wanted to resist, it would be impossible. Richard Swinton said thoughtfully, The other families will see this ruthless attitude and tremble in fear, but they'll probably wonder about the possibility that the Radiants might eventually deceive them. Has everyone been informed? Herman Thompson slowly looked up from the news article. Everything is ready, Father. In 20 minutes we'll have a meeting in the main hall with the city's top officials to discuss the final outcome. Joseph Thompson respectfully reported. With the precedent that's been set, I think no one will object this time, don't you agree? Herman Thompson replied with a big smile. Grandpa Thompson, you don't seem to be worried at all, Richard Swinton asked worriedly. One concern was that the people in the room didn't have any group cohesiveness because they were being controlled by too much force. There was no guarantee that they would act in unison if something bad happened in the future. But Richard, what are you worried about? Herman Thompson took a deep look at him and reassured him. With the addition of the Huxley family, our two families will now be able to get the entire city of St. Louis in line.
including the military, the politicians, and the business community.
Richard tried to defend Kevin. The reason why he wanted to capture those people is because he wants to show that he isn't that tough.
Don't think of Mr. Williams as your foster son, Grandpa Thompson replied. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. But since you've chosen to stand with the rest of us, you must take out what you have left.
Richard Swinton didn't understand his words very well. As a matter of fact, there were many things that he didn't understand.
Richard, you have to remember one thing. Those who have financial strength will never be able to defeat those who hold true power in their hands. Mr. Williams has shown great kindness to our Thompson family, and I'll do my best to support him.
Herman Thompson had the most serious expression that anyone in the room had ever seen. At the Jones family mansion in Chicago, Grandma Jones was sitting on a chair and looking at all the people who were in the room with her. Everybody looked extremely sad. At the time, the Jones family's business had been severely diminished and they were faced with financial collapse.
JJ, how much money do we have left in the company?
Grandma Jones asked quietly. Not much. Less than $10 million, Grandma, Jason Jones answered with difficulty.
You said you would make money by opening another company. What do you have to say for yourself? Are you going to take responsibility for this situation?
Grandma Jones was obviously dissatisfied with Jason's performance. The other members of the Jones family were also looking at Jason with a lot of disapproval. The attempt to expand by starting a new company had caused such a financial strain that the project had failed. Now there wasn't enough money left to maintain the current situation. Jason Jones braced himself and tried to explain what had happened. Grandma, you can't blame me. If you want to blame someone, you should blame that piece of trash Kevin. If he hadn't deliberately let the Williams Company target us, my plan would have succeeded, and I would definitely have been able to make us a lot of money. Many of his relatives began to ponder what he'd said. I think what JJ said is right. It's all that ingrate Kevin's fault, one of his aunts commented. He's been eating and drinking for free all these years, but he doesn't know how to show us his gratitude? Jason's cousin sneered. All of a sudden, everyone in the Jones family was filled with righteous indignation.
Shut up!
Grandma Jones slapped her hand on the table as her eyes swept around the room. She was so angry that she was getting short of breath.
If Kevin is a useless person, what do you think you people are? Is he really trash?
Grandma Jones asked gruffly.
You're in no position to blame anyone else.
Grandma Jones had been thinking about many things, especially the 2 or 3 years that Kevin had been in the Jones family. She really regretted listening to Jason Jones' slanderous accusations back then. Now it was difficult to do anything to improve the situation, which made it impossible for the relationship between the Jones family and Kevin to be on friendlier terms. Just as Grandma Jones was about to say something else, they suddenly heard 2 screams from the doorway. Grandma Jones, you're in danger! The door! One of the Joneses hurriedly ran into the room. He dropped to the floor and pointed at the door with a look of horror on his face. His body was trembling, and he was stammering.
What's wrong with the door?
Grandma Jones asked him probingly. Then they all heard a few more screams. A few members of the Jones family came running into the room and dropped to the floor. After spitting out 2 mouthfuls of blood, they all died. This made everyone in the room very uneasy, to say the least. They all looked towards the door. Several people with forbidding looks on their faces slowly walked in. Their bodies emitted a terrifying aura, as if they were messengers from hell who had come to take their lives. Who are you people? How dare you come to our home and act so insolently? Jason Jones was the first one to jump up. He wanted to show off in front of his grandmother so he could buy back her affection. Who is this worm who dares to yell at me? Does he want to die? The leading man said callously. A second later, he jumped in front of Jason and kicked him right in the chest. Jason, who weighed more than 220 pounds, was sent flying like a rag doll while everyone watched in shock. He crashed heavily into a pillar and spat out a few mouthfuls of blood before collapsing unconscious on the floor. They were all paralyzed with fear, and no one dared to draw attention to themselves by challenging the group of assailants. "Is Kevin Williams a son-in-law in your family?" The man didn't care whether Jason lived or died. He meant nothing to him. The Joneses all started angrily blaming Kevin for the attack. "So you're here to find Kevin after all this time? Has he offended someone?" They all thought that these thugs had come because Kevin had provoked someone powerful. One of them shouted, "That ingrate Kevin has nothing to do with our family anymore. Now get out of here at once." Some of the Joneses threatened to call the police. "You people make so much noise." The man waved his hand and the four men behind him immediately rushed forward. "Since Kevin Williams isn't here, your lives aren't much use to me." Soon the mansion was filled with the sound of painful wailing and people begging for mercy. It had quickly become hell on earth. "How could such a useless family like this have produced a powerful warrior like Kevin Williams?" The leader wiped the blood from his hands and instructed one of his subordinates. "Clean this place up. There should be no evidence that we've been here." It was as if the bloody scene in front of him didn't affect them at all. "Yes, sir," the four of them answered respectfully. A few minutes later, the Jones family mansion was engulfed in flames. In the Swinton family's living room, Nadia Alexander told Kevin about everything that had happened in the Herbalist Society. Kevin was deeply concerned when he heard what had been going on. The thing that he was most worried about had finally happened. The Herbalist Society had shown itself to have evil intentions. "Do you mean to tell me that if you don't get the pill formula from me within a month, the chairman of the Herbalist Society will take your lives?" Kevin tapped his fingers on the table while he thought about the horrible situation. Nadia Alexander nodded slightly. "Then do you think I'll actually give you the formula?" Kevin looked at her deeply and continued to speak. "Why do you still work for such a violent and heartless organization? Don't you think it would be better for you to leave the Herbalist Society?" "Mr. Williams, you don't know the truth about the Herbalist Society, that's why you don't understand." Nadia smiled sadly and said, "Although the members of the society seem to be very powerful on the surface, it's really a form of slavery. We've learned a lot of skills from the society, but we must work until we die to repay them. Once we leave the Herbalist Society, no other organization would dare to take us in, and we would be hunted down for betraying them." "Is the Herbalist Society really that powerful?" Kevin asked himself. This was really an impossible situation. After Nadia Alexander revealed that the Herbalist Society had captured Lily and Phoebe, she tried to explain herself to Kevin by telling him about what was happening in her organization. Now that the society was showing its true colors as an evil organization, he tried to convince her to leave the Herbalist Society instead of making him hand over the pill recipes to her. However, Nadia explained how it was impossible to get out of the group because its members exchanged power and skills for a lifetime of servitude and indebtedness. Besides, the Herbalist Society isn't entirely made up of just herbalists. It has a division of warriors that no one in the world knows about. And in recent decades, its strength has advanced by leaps and bounds to an extent that the rest of the members wouldn't dare to have any thoughts of rebelling, Nadia said in a low voice. "Even though I've been in the Herbalist Society for so many years, I've only seen the tip of the iceberg myself." Nadia took a deep breath and her eyes revealed some fear as she continued. "Kevin, I'm doing this for your own good. Hand over the pill recipes to me. Otherwise, you'll be investigated by the Herbalist Society, and they'll make sure that you won't be able to eat or sleep again until the chairman gets what he wants." Hearing this, Kevin frowned deeply. He was having trouble wrapping his brain around this new revelation. Previously, he'd already thought about the possibility that the Herbalist Society was actually the same as the Alliance and the Myriads. It was huge organizations like this, which only appeared to be good on the surface, that he deliberately wanted to let the people of the world know about. In fact, even Kevin had regarded the Herbalist Society highly in the past. However, Nadia Alexander's words made him realize one thing clearly. He didn't really know much about the Herbalist Society, and only those members who were hidden in the deepest parts of the organization had true strength and free will. After a long period of silence, Kevin asked faintly, "Then who do you think is more powerful than the Herbalist Society?" Admittedly, the strength of the society is quite comparable to the strength of the top 10 schools. Nadia's words were very casual, as if she was describing a simple fact. To someone like you, they may just be a bunch of weaklings who can't even withstand a single blow. But the rest of us won't stand a chance against them at all. Besides, even with your strength and herbalism skills, what can one person do against an entire organization? What if I told you that there's an organization that can accommodate all of the members who dare to defect from the Herbalist Society? Kevin looked straight into her eyes as he offered her an option. Impossible. No organization would dare to challenge the Herbalist Society. Not even the top 10 schools would do such a thing. Nadia shook her head without hesitating. I can assure you that there is one, but it depends on whether or not you have the courage to join. Kevin's words seemed to have a deeper meaning. He didn't initially have any plans to go against the Herbalist Society, but now that they'd already chosen to bully him, he didn't dare to let them think that he was a pushover. So he had to take some substantial countermeasures and ensure that he was several steps ahead of them. In a secret hideout of the Herbalist Society in Chicago, dozens of members were staring with lust in their eyes at the two tied-up women. They felt like Lily and Phoebe were the most beautiful women in the world. "They're so damn hot! I'm already drooling just from looking at them," one of the junior members exclaimed.
Save it. This is someone whom Madam President has instructed us to take especially good care of. If you dare to do anything out of line to them, you'll definitely suffer when she gets back," another member cautioned. "I'm sure there's nothing wrong with admiring them from a distance. After all, it's not every day that we get to see beauties like them," a third one chuckled. Just as these members were discussing this, a loud explosion suddenly sounded as someone forcefully smashed the iron door into pieces using brute force. This shocked everyone inside the room, and after the dust settled, 5 imposing figures slowly walked in. "Are they Lily Williams and Phoebe Anderson?"
The leader of the 5 directly looked at the two women.
"Who the hell are you? What are you doing inside the Herbalist Society's office? Don't you know that this is a restricted area? Leave this place immediately," one of the junior members threatened.
"Didn't you hear us? Why aren't you leaving yet?"
another sneered.
"We already warned you, so don't blame us for being rude. Let's throw them out, men."
The junior members of the Midwest branch then rolled up their sleeves and walked up to the 5 figures and stood in front of them.
"I'm asking again, are they Lily Williams and Phoebe Anderson? I don't want to repeat myself a third time. If you want to live, you better answer honestly,"
the leader of the 5 intruders said roughly.
"So what if they are? What are you going to do about it? If you have the ability, then I dare you to take them away,"
one of the Herbalist Society's men suddenly taunted them.
"All right, if that's your wish, then I'd be more than happy to fulfill it."
The man in the lead waved his hand gently, and the 4 men behind him then proceeded to shoot out like arrows towards the members of the Herbalist Society's Midwest branch. Their punches and kicks were absolutely unstoppable as they landed one strike after another. Even if they weren't martial arts experts, one would think that people who entered the Herbalist Society should have at least some basic fighting skills. However, despite outnumbering their opponents by dozens, none of them had the ability to land a single blow nor the strength to defend themselves. It was like a flock of sheep facing 4 fierce tigers. In less than a minute, all of them were lying dead on the ground. Luckily, Lily and Phoebe were still unconscious, so they didn't have to witness the bloody scene surrounding them. The leader of the 5 men looked at the 2 women and lightly nodded his head as if to confirm their identities. Then he let the others take them away immediately. As their figures completely disappeared into the darkness, the secret hideout was turned into ruins by another intense explosion. Meanwhile, at the Central Alternative Healing Academy, Dorothy looked at Paul Vaughn and the other leaders of the top 9 schools who were sitting in front of her. She was so scared for her life that her whole body was trembling uncontrollably. "I've already told you many times. I really don't know where that piece of trash Kevin is, so please let me go. I don't care if he's my son-in-law. Feel free to look for him and get all you want. Even if you break his legs and kill him, it doesn't have anything to do with me," Dorothy pleaded weakly. Facing an uncertain fate, she was regretting how she'd promised all of the power pills to them without thinking about it thoroughly. Had she known that she would get into this kind of trouble because of it, Dorothy wouldn't have agreed so casually back then. After being held captive and locked up for so many days, the only thing she could think of at this moment was to go home. Paul Vaughn slowly walked up to Dorothy and slapped her hard on the face, knocking her down to the ground. This caused one of her cheeks to swell up as blood flowed down the corner of her mouth.
"Do you think we're that stupid to fall for your act? Or are you really that clueless?"
Paul Vaughn looked at her with disgust. To him, Jeffrey, Bowie, and the others, Dorothy was just like an ant that could be crushed at any time. Originally, she meant nothing to them, but now it was different. They needed her to lure Kevin out. Kenneth Wilkinson's strength had given rise to fear in their hearts. If they couldn't obtain enough power pills to increase the strength of their respective organizations, they would eventually be crushed and eliminated by the Radiants. "Please let me go. I really don't know anything. If Kevin has provoked you in any way, that's your business with him. I'm just an ordinary woman." By now, Dorothy hated Kevin to the core. If it wasn't for him, she wouldn't be in such a precarious situation right now. And if she could go back home, she would definitely force her daughter to divorce that useless trash for good this time.
"Miss Jones, you were the one who promised us those power pills. But don't worry, we're just inviting you to stay here for a little while until we've obtained them," Wayne Ford said with a stern expression. "Besides, Kevin is nowhere to be found, so we need you here to make him show himself."
Paul Vaughn didn't want to waste any more time on Dorothy. He waved his hand at 2 of his men who took her away without caring about her struggles.
"Do you think this woman really doesn't know? Or is she just pretending that she doesn't know?"
Paul frowned slightly and asked the others.
"She doesn't look like she's faking it. Maybe Kevin really hid it from his family,"
Wayne Ford surmised with the disappointment showing on his face. Jeffrey Bowie slapped the table and angrily remarked,
"It doesn't matter whether she knows or not. As long as she's Kevin's mother-in-law, we can use her as a hostage in exchange for enough power pills for everyone."
"Then it's settled. Let's wait a few more days. I want to see how patient Kevin is."
Paul sneered and nodded his head. When he got back to the dean's office of the Healing Arts School, Wayne Ford was sitting in a chair looking over the information he'd just been given. At the same time, Harley Shepard had his hands behind his back as he paced back and forth.
"Within 2 days, 3 families in Chicago have already been eliminated?"
Wayne asked in a serious tone.
"Not only that, but those people also died in the same way, so the same person must have killed them all."
Harley sighed and shook his head.
"Who was behind this? How could he be so vicious?"
Wayne's brows furrowed. Harley stopped pacing around and answered,
"We don't know yet, but given the manner in which they died, these cases aren't something that the police or FBI can take responsibility for. This news has already reached the great powers, so there should be an investigation conducted in a few days." After a few moments of silence, Wayne suddenly thought of something.
"Anyway, do you have any news about Kevin?"
"The people I've sent out have reported the latest info we've got. It looks like Kevin had been in Detroit, but he soon went to St. Louis. He was adopted by the patriarch of the Swinton family as his foster son, and he's also received special attention from Herman Thompson.
Harley briefly explained the situation.
St. Louis?
Wayne's facial expression changed subtly. What was Kevin doing there?
There are no great powers yet in St. Louis. The city is mostly controlled by entrepreneurial families who are bound by state and federal laws. Because of that, even our people can't arrest Kevin openly, let alone the three big families,
Harley admitted with a rueful smile.
Is that so? Then get someone to keep an eye on Kevin. As soon as he steps out of St. Louis, capture him immediately. I want to ask him about Roger Knott.
Wayne threw the document on the table. His tone was filled with anger. Meanwhile, in a room inside the Radiance's headquarters, Miranda was currently sitting by Dalton's bedside. Worried about her husband's safety, she'd previously asked Kevin to arrange for someone to take her and Norman Steele over to be with him. Suddenly, Dalton slowly opened his eyes. When he looked at Miranda, they both suddenly became overjoyed. "Hubby, you're finally awake!" Miranda burst into tears. She hugged Dalton tightly and buried her head in his chest.
Is it really you, Miranda? I'm not dreaming, am I?
Dalton wanted to hug his wife, but just as he slightly moved his hand, he felt a searing pain coming from his entire arm. "Yes, it's me, Dalton. I've been worried about you for the past few days. I was afraid that something would happen to you." Miranda cried hard as tears kept falling down her face. Although she'd seen Dalton fight others many times in the past, this was the first time she felt that he was so close to death. And given how when she'd escaped from their home uncertain about his fate, it was very likely that they would never see each other again in the future. Even though Kevin had promised her that he would definitely save Dalton, Miranda's heart was still burning with anxiety the entire time that they were apart. And the days she spent hiding in the office of the Williams Company and waiting for news had felt like an eternity.
Miranda, don't cry anymore. I'll be all right.
Dalton then looked around the room and was confused.
Anyway, what is this place? Why are you here?
The last thing Dalton remembered was being in the Williams family's mansion in New York. While he was being tortured and threatened by Kelly Emmett, he remembered suddenly being saved by someone just before he fell unconscious. It was all very confusing for him.